Hello, and thanks for watching. I'm Susan Checkow-Lusignan, Director of Marketing and Program Development for the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library. FFRPL is the 501c3 charity that raises funds, presents programs, supports special projects, helps to create specialized spaces, and purchases supplemental materials and equipment for the Rochester Public Library. Learn more at ffrpl.org. We are delighted to present this installment of the virtual version of our Fall 2020 Books Sandwiched In series of book reviews. As many of you know, Books Sandwiched In has been running continuously since 1956. We'd like to thank all of our reviewers who are participating remotely this season, and we look forward to welcoming everyone back to the library when it is safe and healthy for staff, reviewers, and the public. Our fall BSI roster focuses on diversity and inclusion. Today's presentation will be a review of Hidden Valley Road, Inside the Mind of an American Family by Robert Kolker. Kolker's book is a biography of the Galvins, an American family from Colorado Springs who had 12 children, 6 of whom were diagnosed with schizophrenia. The Galvins became the subject of scientific study in the 1980s and have since become a pivotal case in one of humanity's most complex diseases. Our presenter today is Dr. Talva E. Olivares, professor of clinical psychiatry and clinical medicine at the University of Rochester Medical Center and an internist psychiatrist at the University of Rochester. She has extensive clinical and administrative experiences in all aspects of psychiatric acute services, having served as the medical director of acute psychiatry services, the medical director of comprehensive psychiatric emergency program, and more recently, the medical director of interventional psychiatry program, where she established the very popular Interventional Psychiatric Certificate course for psychiatric residents.
Hello, good evening. My name is Talva Olivares, and I'm clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of Rochester. Today I'm going to be reviewing the book Hidden Valley Road, Inside the Mind of an American Family by Robert Kolker. This book was released in the spring of this year and has been well received, including having made it into the Oprah Winfrey Book Club list of 2020. This is a narrative nonfiction book about the Galvin family of Colorado Springs, whose battle with mental illness has captured the attention and imagination of the author and research scientists around the world. The family story spans more than half a century, from 1945, when the first Galvin boy was born, until the present. Spanning the baby boomer generation, this family of 12 children, 10 boys, and the 2 youngest, the girls, had their magical middle-class lifestyle disrupted, as 6 of the 12 children, one by one, became ill and diagnosed with schizophrenia. Mimi and Donald Galvin, the parents, had held great hope for all 12 of their children. Their dreams of success and living the American dream were abruptly terminated as each older boy succumbed to this mind-altering illness. All the while, the younger Galvins each quietly feared their own destiny as the illness slowly captured their older siblings into a distant world of psychosis, and they wondered when their turn might come. Schizophrenia is a severe and persistent mental illness made up of a complex of symptoms that tend to be continuous or relapsing. Often erroneously misrepresented in movies and in lay literature as one having split or multiple personalities, the term coined by Eugene Bleuler, a psychiatrist in the early 1900s, refers to the split between the emotional and the intellectual portions of one's personalities. The illness first presents in late adolescence and steals away the individual's life, often presenting with a downtrending course of social unawareness and dysfunctioning, what Kraepelin, another early century psychiatrist, initially termed dementia precoce. The Galvin children were not diagnosed until they were well into their 20s, likely due to the chaotic family life created by the sheer presence of so many of them. The boys' knack for physical fights and bullying amongst one another was not discouraged by Mimi, who took on a boys will be boys attitude towards those often violent confrontations which affected every member of the family in its own way. The book is cleverly divided into 3 parts. Part 1 is dedicated to the parents, Mimi and Donald Galvin, and lays down the framework for their relationship, their love, their quest to live the ideal post-World War American family dream. Don, by his own right, had fashioned a very successful life for himself as an officer in the Air Force, which allowed the Galvins the opportunity to rub elbows with dignitaries and royalty from around the world. Mimi, who married young and became pregnant right away, was unable to partake of higher studies, on the other hand, and became completely devoted to being the perfect housewife and mother of a rapidly growing family. Having children and raising them became the thing she excelled at most, and her contribution to the marriage. Part 2 of the book is dedicated to the children. One by one, Mr. Colker describes each child and each personal journey into their battle with schizophrenia. The Galvin family boys, one by one, were diagnosed with schizophrenia, and Colker does a brilliant job of carefully describing each child's journey and symptomatology, deliberately emphasizing the similarities and the heterogeneous nature of the illness itself. The author masterfully weaves the real-life knowledge about the etiology of schizophrenia and known treatment modalities at the time into each child's individual history. From the now debunked psychological theory of schizophrenogenic mother, which led to much mistrust between families and the medical establishment at the time, this led mothers to hide and treat their affected children at home or not at all, much as Mimi did with most of her children, in order to avoid criticisms and blame for their parenting styles. Families tended to avoid taking children with odd behaviors to treatment, thus further isolating and stigmatizing the illness and its patients. The evolution of treatments for schizophrenia in those early days were few and encompassed psychological theories from Bloor's concept of eugenics, Freud's psychoanalytic approach to the illness, to Jung's belief that this was a more physical illness than Freud could appreciate. The nature versus nurture theories of the case predominated then and still does. The theories about most mental illness are marked with these questions: is it nurture or nature? While the chapters dedicated to the ill boys are rich in clinical information, the surviving children's lives are not less interesting as the reader is pulled into the story of their own struggle to endure, stand out, and survive this dysfunctional family. In part 3 of the book, Robert Colker captures in great detail the lives of the youngest Galvins, Lindsay and Margaret, and tracks their complex relationship through time. From a typical older-younger sister connection and admiration during the early childhood years, to developing a very close, inseparable bond in their late teens. Finally, emerging into very different women who chose diverse ways of handling their common trauma of growing up in a large dysfunctional household which claimed the minds of 6 of the 12 siblings. In the late 1970s and beyond, the Galvin family agreed to participate in several National Institute of Mental Health studies which hoped to address the nature versus nurture question that this mental illness in particular has raised. The author very cleverly weaves in the behind-the-scenes story of major researchers and their quest to find answers that would explain the nature of this illness, which impacts about 1% of the world's population. In some of the most fascinating chapters of the book, Mr. Colker exposes the reader to some fascinating research findings that have not yet been widely disseminated. Findings which are inextricably connected to the Galvins and to 30-plus other multiplex families with several members suffering from schizophrenia, who willingly participated in interviews with researchers, provided blood and DNA samples in order to advance the science of the disease. They all contributed to the now known as the Human Genome Project, which has been instrumental in trying to decipher the mystery of schizophrenia and many other illnesses. Through these efforts and the courageous participation of these families, researchers have been able to identify several genes and gene mutations that are prevalent in the illness and that could play an important role in better understanding the etiology of schizophrenia and the capacity to develop targeted treatments to cure it. The Galvin contribution to the science of mental illness is still evolving today. Researchers have been able to demonstrate a CHANK2 gene mutation found in all the Galvin boys and in their mother, Mimi. This mutation has been found in patients with bipolar illness, schizophrenia, and other mental illnesses. Targeted treatment might be the next logical step to follow, one would think, but low prevalence rates of the disease in the general population is not tantalizing enough for pharma to consider developing possible treatments that might lead to the cure of this disastrous illness. Success in this way will need to be followed via other alternative paths of promoting research funding streams not committed to by pharma. This book was well written and riveting. The storyline of an apparently normal middle-class Midwest family in post-World War USA living the American dream, and it's suddenly shattered and interrupted as one by one 6 of their 12 children succumbed to nightmare of having schizophrenia in a time when there were few treatments available. The Galvin story is brought to life by Robert Colker's excellent ability to tell their individual journeys with dignity and empathy. He skillfully lets us into the lives of 12 complex characters and interestingly weaves real science into their story, pushing the reader to both learn about the science of schizophrenia while delving into the emotional whirlwind of the Galvin sense of what family means. This book has been loudly applauded by many, including Oprah's book club, and now also by me, an internist psychiatrist who has treated many others just like the Galvin boys and longs for more scientific answers that can help not only the Galvin, but many more. I hope you enjoyed the reading. I certainly found it fascinating and very complex. I thoroughly enjoyed how Mr. Kolker was able to interview all the characters in the books that were alive and how he informed his story through data and scientific research. It's really a fascinating read. You really can't put it down, and it's well worth reading. Thank you very much, and good night.